Russia's defense ministry says rebel groups have been armed with chemical weapons in Syria and are planning to stage false flag attacks as a pretext for the US to carry out airstrikes.
Representatives of the Russian armed forces have said they have reason to believe that the United States at its At-Tanf base in Syria has been preparing squads of rebels, fighters, to stage a chemical provocation, a chemical weapons attack in the south of Syria, in Deraa, which borders Jordan and Israel. They've been provided, allegedly, as many as 20 tons of chlorine, as well as detonators disguised as cigarette packs. And this attack is imminent. Defense officials have said that this attack will be blamed on the Syrian government and will be used as an excuse by the United States and its allies to strike at Bashar al-Assad, his government and his military directly.
The provocations mentioned will be used as a pretext for the United States and its allies to conduct airstrikes against military and state infrastructure in Syria. We are seeing that such strikes are being prepared by warships in the Mediterranean, the Red Sea and in the Persian Gulf.
At the same time, speaking in Astana, Sergey Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said that the Syrian conflict is beginning to look less like a proxy war than a direct confrontation.
There are US special forces on the ground. They are no longer denying this. They are accompanied by the British, French and special forces from other countries. It's not a proxy war anymore, but rather a direct involvement in the war. We condemn their illegal presence on Syria's territory. The US-led coalition is not legitimate from the UN point of view either. We are pragmatic people, and we understand that we should not engage in armed conflict with them.
Representatives of the Russian armed forces have also talked about the situation in East Ghouta, from which they say 47,000 civilians have fled in the last several weeks. They say there's a huge operation, humanitarian operation underway. 3 convoys of aid have gone into Ghouta as well, and they say the UN representatives on the ground in East Ghouta have praised the Russian and Syrian effort in relieving the situation there, providing food and other aid for civilians in need. They also say that armed groups in East Ghouta, as well as Islamists, have expressed a desire to leave East Ghouta for Idlib, for other locations, once their sponsors give the green light.
Well, these are the latest pictures from one of those humanitarian corridors. Crowds of people are using the escape route to reach government-controlled areas. Over 44,000 people have managed to flee from Ghouta so far. It's the biggest single exodus since fighting escalated last month. The first to make it to safety were children, women and the injured, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. They were given basic supplies when they reached the government-controlled side of the corridor. Here's how they described life under militant rule.
The militants were living with us next to our houses and inside them. They would open a road amongst the houses to be able to move. They would not leave, and we did not dare to say, "Get out."
They fired at us. They didn't want us to escape at all. They fired at the car's wheels so that we couldn't leave.
We had no food or water. There are 10 of us and we could not buy a kilo of flour. We were starving. We wanted to escape, but they wouldn't let us. We fled against their will, so they fired at us, and half of the people were shot. Look at our children, bare feet, hungry, and without clothes. But the militants showed no mercy.
The aid was given only to certain groups. Most of the medical aid was sold. It was from humanitarian agencies and the UN and was distributed in Ghouta under the supervision of our government. But the militants were selling it.
I don't remember the last time I ate. We didn't have food in our village. The militants took everything that the humanitarian convoys delivered.
Meanwhile, the UN's special envoy to the country has welcomed a brief ceasefire in the city of Duma in eastern Ghouta. Staffan de Mistura also renewed calls for an end to the hostilities across Syria.
Further meetings have been taking place since the Secretary General's briefing between the Russian Federation and Jaish Islam in the last few days on the outskirts of Duma. As a result of this engagement, a tenuous, fragile ceasefire between the government, Russian military and Jaish Islam forces has continued to largely hold for the 6th day now. Let's hope that therefore the ceasefire holds, because that has been at least one good news among very bad news.
Eastern Ghouta was seized by rebels in late 2012 and since 2013 has been under siege as the Syrian army tries to recapture the area. The Assad government has now succeeded in driving the militants into 3 small pockets, regaining control of much of the region. Despite the advances, many civilians there are still living in dire conditions. Political analyst and author Phyllis Bennett told us the humanitarian crisis will be felt right across the Middle East.
There is no place for them to go. The country of Syria has been decimated by these 7 years of war, and people have been moved from one place to another looking for safety and not finding it. Those who have been driven out of the country are finding the gates of other countries closed against them, most notably, of course, the United States, which has prohibited refugees coming from Syria altogether in the context of the so-called Muslim bans that Donald Trump has imposed. But even the countries closer, the countries right in the region who are already taking care of hundreds of thousands, in some cases more than 1 million refugees. In Lebanon, for instance, a very small country, 1 out of every 4 people in that country is now a Syrian refugee. In Jordan, where there's over 1 million refugees, but there's simply not enough water available. So the humanitarian crisis is massive on a regional level, certainly within Syria is the most serious, then on the regional level and on a global level. The Syrian refugees are facing a devastating future.